All right, good. Good to experiment. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about some basic animation. Okay, and a few areas to check out. First is notice that we have this timeline down below here. This can be edited in terms of the amount of frames that we want. When you open this up, a new file, you're going to get the standard is 90 frames. All right, and what we're going to be working at is essentially 30 frames per second. So that gives us this 90 frames would be 3 seconds of video that we're working with. And then you can change it at any time. Down below there's a little slider that allows you to sort of go back and forth. You can change the frames. If I wanted this to be 5 seconds, I could type in 150. And you can make this up to like 1,000,000 frames if you want. I don't know if you can do 1,000,000, but you can do very many. And then you can scroll back and forth with the slider bar, or you can extend it so you can see the whole view of all of those frames. Okay, and then this is to the right of that that area that we can add more frames is the controls. So if you hit play, you'll notice that the little green bar is moving across along the timeline, and obviously you can hit stop. You can click this left arrow to go to the beginning. You can click the right arrow to go to the end, and you can move along frame by frame using the arrow to the next. So, and you can also, next to the keyframe timeline, you can also type in what keyframe you want. If you want to go in frame 50, you can type that in, hit return, and the keyframe will move ahead into that place. So that's one way with the control. Next to this is the keyframe buttons. We have the basic keyframe button, which isn't highlighted yet, the auto keyframe, and the object keyframe button. So what we can do is let's just start by dropping a basic object in. Just put a cube in there, and let's get this thing to move around a little bit. So the first thing is let's bring our keyframe cursor to 0. All right, so just kick the left bar all the way back, and then what we can do is we'll just start at 0, 0. To add a keyframe, you just simply click on this keyframe button to the left. It's highlighted with a little key. You click on that, you can manually drop a keyframe in. Notice what happens. You get a little blue bar underneath the green cursor. Okay, and that indicates that there's a keyframe there. Now, some basic controls that we can use for the objects. We can move an object, we can scale an object, and we can rotate an object. And all of those things can be keyframed. So the basic one to begin with would be to move an object. Now, once you've added a keyframe, if you move forward, first step is move forward in the timeline. So I'm going to move to frame 50, and then I can move my object. Just move it back in space a little bit. And then I can simply manually push the keyframe button again, and you see what happens. It adds a keyframe at 0, 0. That's designated, and then we have this line that connects to its next position. And if we look from above, if we go to the top view, let's say, you can see that there's this dotted line. All of those little black dots represent frames, okay? And you can see that they're close together, close to the keyframe, and they're moving farther apart, and they're getting close together again. Because this thing is kind of like a car starting, right? It starts out slow, it gets to speed, and then as it hits the brakes, it slows back down. That's kind of the motion that it receives. All right, so let's just add a few more keyframes so I can illustrate a few more things. Let's move forward. Again, first move forward on the keyframe, then move the object. So let's just go along the Z plane there. Click the click the keyframe button, and then finally, let's go to the end, move forward, and then move the object, and then click the keyframe. All right. Question?
Is there a general rule for how many?
Now we have our keyframes that are added. We have 4 keyframes, and we can just simply hit the play button. This green arrow that moves to the right. You can hit that, and you can see the motion that we've created. All right. So it's just simply following along the line. You notice how it kind of slowly moves around the piece. Now the other thing about these keyframes that we have is that if we go to the top view again, let's go to this top view, zoom out a little bit. Each one of these keyframes, we can actually click on them and move them a little bit. And this is going to control the speed. All right, you'll slowly control the position and the speed by just grabbing the keyframe and moving it. So if I move this really close right here, and then we go back to our perspective view, and we view this, you can see that the motion has changed, right? Starts out slow, goes quick to the back, and then slowly to the front again. All right, so at any time you can manipulate that path that you've created for the movement of the object. So the other thing is that once we have a little bit of motion started, we can also add other elements to this. So it just doesn't have to be one keyframed motion. We can add other keyframes to this. So if we go to frame 50, all right, we could also rotate this as well. All right, so let's just say we go back to keyframe 50 where we've moved it along. Let's move to the rotation tool, and then let's just take this thing and spin it a little bit. All right, and then remember to hit the manual keyframe button, and let's watch this what happens. All right. So it starts out in the current orientation. It rolls itself into that first orientation, and then it rolls itself back. Okay. Now the reason why it rolls itself back is because at the end keyframe we have its original orientation already added to that keyframe, and at frame 50 we've manipulated that, so we can change that sort of orientation along the way. All right.
So all attributes are pretty much saved at all points. You don't have to specifically set it as such. So if you want to switch automatically back, you don't have to do anything.
Right. So you can assume that if you've keyframed frame 150 at its original orientation, then and you do some changes in rotation, it will go back to that original set. Yeah. If if you're planning this out ahead of time, you could add those changes as you go, sort of from keyframe to keyframe. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the auto keyframe. Okay. The auto keyframe allows you to be a little bit more fluid with your keyframing and not have to be so meticulous with the manual type of keyframing. So if and this is helpful for things like scale, because scale can sometimes be a little bit tricky to deal with in terms of keyframing. You can manually keyframe it, but when we start to deal with the scale tool, there are other elements that can add into this that we can change. So let's just open up a new window and drop in something else. Let's drop in a sphere, and let's grab the scale tool, and then if you see right next to the keyframe button that we were pressing is the auto keyframe. Now the way that this works is once this is pressed, it's going to highlight the viewport. So if I press this, it'll highlight the viewport, and anytime we move forward or move in the timeline and do a change to our object, it's going to record that. So it's just automatically recording the changes that you do. Okay. The thing that I like to do when I start is just manually drop in a keyframe at 0, just so I know one is there. Okay, just by hitting the keyframe button. And then as we move forward, if we go to frame 45, let's say, and we scale this thing up, it automatically puts in a keyframe for us. And if we go back to 90 and we scale it down, it's going to put in a keyframe there as well. So if we do that and then we hit the auto keyframe, just turn it off, we should be able to see that's the change in motion there. Okay, so it's moving up, it's moving down in space, and changing its proportion as we go. So we can, the basic elements of animating are going to be movement in terms of its position in the X, Y, and Z, rotation, so its orientation along that X, Y, and Z, and then its scale. So between those three things, you can really do a lot with how something changes its form. Question?